All right, so let's get started.
Great.
So I have us online,
Cool.
and so anyone else who is listening via Facebook, welcome. Thanks for joining us for Conversations on Life Transitions for Artists with Phil Doud, and I'm pronouncing that correctly?
hmm
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, just as a little intro, my name is Jazel Trisha. I'm a certified fitness expert. My goal is to help people find joy through movement, connect with their bodies, increase their energy, and really to build a strong mind, body, and soul. I offer virtual training sessions and customized fitness programs with a holistic approach that helps people transform from the inside out, mentally and physically. One of the reasons why Phil and I connected was because I really felt like there was a need to talk about the struggles that dancers and artists go through while transitioning through various phases in life, and also how they cope with aging, because I mean everyone goes through aging, but in particular dancers and artists, we have this idea that, like, our careers only last for so long,
Yeah.
and our bodies change so much within that. But before we dive into that, Phil, I would love if you can tell the listeners more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Phil Doud, and I am a life coach with Heroically Life Coaching. And my goal is to help people find what it means for them to flourish, for them to thrive. And I love what you were talking about in terms of the aspects of integration that you're working with. And it feels like such a wonderful partnership to be able to be in conversation, and that, like, I'm not working with a lot of the physical stuff, but I am in a lot of the sort of mental, social, spiritual stuff. And like, I know how helpful the physical stuff has been, and how important that is. And so I talk about it with clients a lot, but it's lovely to have other people that are doing that side of the work and coming at it from that angle. And I feel like I'm in my area, but also pushing people to think about who they are and what it means for them to thrive as an embodied person.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have several categories of folks that I'm primarily working with. So artists and creatives are a big one. People in helping and caregiving roles, basically lots of folks whose work is really tied to their own identity and how they are doing. It's one thing if you are in a job that is much more maybe on the production side of things, where it's go in and do sort of technical performance, but when it's so tied to how you are doing and who you are, it
Yeah.
asks a different bit of you. And I think we'll talk about some of that today.
Yeah.
It's much more sort of unique and contingent and contextual.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
As far as your work, do you mainly just see people kind of like on a one-on-one basis, or do you ever have like kind of like group
yeah, so
sessions or
I've done a few couples who are like going through life transitions, and it's it's more in that space discernment about what it means to sort of transition their life and how they want to move together. But mostly it's with individuals. But I do actually run gaming groups for people that are groups, and we're using games as a space to cultivate playfulness and community
Yeah.
and sort of reflective exploration of identity. So we'll both play and then have time to sort of explore what that means and what that brings up. And I think often as adults and professionals, it can be really hard for us to play, but especially if you're in spaces that are asking a lot of you personally, then that's needed to help sort of cultivate sustainability. So that's the kind of group work that I do. And I've done
that's really interesting that you have that for like gaming in particular. And like, I think as far as like gaming, like some people have that perception of it, like, oh, you know, they're just like messing around, but there's a lot more to
Totally.
like the intellectual connectivity side of it that you don't think about, or like you
Yeah.
don't see until like you actually like experience it, and you know,
Yeah, totally. Right, right. Yeah, we
yeah.
have that stereotype of
Mhm.
you know, like, no, this is serious stuff. Stop playing around, and you know, don't play games with me. Those kind of
Yeah.
things, right? But like, we need that, and it's really easy to make it about just something that's for kids and that we should like not be doing anymore as adults. But it is so needed.
Mhm.
And playfulness is an actual skill that can be cultivated and grown and developed. It's not just something that like comes and goes. And if you're like, well, I'm not a very playful person, that's okay.
Uh-huh.
Um, that is something that can be um, you can get better at.
That's really interesting. It's like I guess I never really thought of like playfulness like as a skill, but as something that, you know, is definitely more natural to do like at a younger age. But,
Totally,
you
right,
know,
which it
as you
is.
grow
Yeah,
older, like you just
yeah, we push it
maybe
off.
because we don't practice like
Yeah, 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 yeah,
playfulness,
exactly.
the
And
fun.
we're like expected and rewarded and, you know, given toys and all these sort of things
Mhm.
when we're younger, and then somewhere in our you know, later childhood, adolescence, we start getting punished for it,
Yeah.
and so that sort of goes away.
Hmm.
Except for, you know, weird little things like lots of people, you know, maybe have games that they play on their phone, or there's people that are like,
Yeah.
you know, much more like gamers as an identity,
Hmm.
but um, that's, you know, a subset
Yeah.
of most adults, or it's, you know, hidden. You
Hmm.
know, we keep that separate from, you know, our real adult life or work. And I think the same thing happens um, with creatives sometimes too, is this sense of like, people say, um, well, you know, there's people that are creatives and are artists, and like,
Hmm.
I'm not creative, like I don't have that. And that's also something that can be like, that's also a skill that can be cultivated and is really helpful in our like thriving and flourishing, and like being a fully formed person is being able to have that. But like, we also take that construct at a, you know, usually it's around the same time frame,
Hmm.
you know, late childhood, middle school, early high school, and say at some point in time I learned I wasn't good at, you know, drawing or being an artist or being creative or expressive, and so
Yeah.
I stopped doing it because being good at it is what I needed to be able to do that, rather than like, you know, look at the artwork of, you know, any kindergartner, right? Like, you're like looking at their crayon drawing, and um, you don't know. I mean, you have to ask them what it is, right? Like, the technical the technical aspect isn't there, but it's like really helpful and needed for them to be able to create. And the same thing happens with, I think, with body movement, whether that's in the side of dance or athleticism or physical activity. And um,
I think it's interesting that you say that, because at least for me growing up, I always knew like, you know, there's the dancers and then there's the choreographers.
totally.
So the dancers will like perform it, but the
Hmm.
choreographers were the more creative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're the ones who are coming up with it, right?
And I, at least like for me, it was hard, or it was just more of like a process for me to get in touch with myself as an artist, and be able to like bring that out and like embody certain ideas through my work and through dancing itself and just moving. Um,
Yeah,
but growing up, I was always more, I always focused more like on the technical side, because I had
right.
like disconnect where like I didn't really know how to express myself
Yeah, yeah. Right.
through
You were expressing
art.
someone else's vision in a
Yeah.
sense.
Hmm.
Yeah. What what like what was your process of getting in touch with that, or tell me about that? Um,
Uh, I
what
think,
helped?
yeah, it was. definitely one, being more exposed to other dancers that I can see were like really in touch with their movement and specifically the feeling,
Yeah.
and
So
how,
like you needed some modeling of
yeah,
other people. Okay.
I think one, exposure, but I think I was I got a better grasp at that when I went to Loyola Marymount for dance and did
Mm-hmm.
more improv work and
Yeah, totally.
like kind of like breaking down like movement in its most like fundamental way, like
Yeah.
where, you know, they say don't focus on making shapes or like make doing poses, like you don't want to be doing like an arabesque, like just scratch that out, like what is it that you're feeling, or like what are you trying to express through your movements, and playing with that range. And
Yeah, really
working
getting
with
in
people
touch.
and that I felt like it really made sense to know how to portray that. And
Yeah.
as a dancer, I've always wanted to put that into how I did any form of dance, whether it was like more technical or like more modern, contemporary, unstructured work.
Yeah. Yeah, that is like it's rooted in a really different place
Yeah.
if it's if that's there versus I mean I think even as a non-dancer who really doesn't have eyes to see and definitely in other aspects of uh, artistic creation I've seen that too, where it's like we've seen versions of like technical presentations of things that feel a bit soulless, where it's just like kind of going through the motions, or like you know um, the art that might get put up in like a hospital hallway or a motel room or something like that.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like
It's like it's there, like
yeah,
like
yeah. And I've seen I think there's something in particular about dance that like you can be a technical executioner of another's
yeah,
idea, but
work.
it does ask more of you to even in that to still show up
Yeah,
uh, more than maybe even some other things that can be technically created, but there's still
like
yeah,
an embodiment of
yeah, yeah.
whatever
It's more personal by default because it's about I think you doing it rather than this external creation
mm-hmm.
of like here's what I painted and now I'm distant from it, or what I've written or whatever.
Yeah,
You're in it and doing it.
yeah.
Yeah, what things help you to connect to that in your I mean like I heard about the processes, but like how
Mm.
about now that you're like living your life as you are, like what are ways that help you connect to those things?
Definitely, basically anything moving my body. So like whether it's like through fitness, through dance and doing improv, or doing yoga. I've actually connected with, she's a choreographer who was born in El Paso, but she was living in New York when I met her, and and has she has her own company, but she's also kind of made a subset of her company called Voleto Heal, and focusing more on using dance as a healing process.
Yeah.
So adding a little bit more kind of like meditation with movement. I feel like that's really helped me kind of just still get in touch with like what I'm feeling and being able to cope with like my emotions
Yeah.
and express that through movement.
I love it. I mean that's a total overlap in our
Yeah.
work and field of like, I'm doing mindfulness work and meditation work with clients all the time and helping them understand in a sense what is internally moving in them or what is moving them emotionally as well as I think we're so as a general rule disconnected from our bodies as a culture,
Absolutely.
and so like it's it's serious work For a lot of us, whether you grew up more totally sedentary or disconnected, or like I was a college athlete, but my body was this like sort of external machine that I needed to, like maximize the performance of in this way that like I learned to pay attention to certain parts and then really distance from other parts.
Mm-hmm. It's just like it's like you are like in tune with your body, but there's also, because it's for a different objective than feeling,
Yeah.
like there is like that disconnect with the performance aspects and like the actual like feeling aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happens a lot with dancers too, because we, to an extent, like we always want to create that perfect shape, like
Yeah.
the
Yep.
perfect like arabesque, or like be more on like the technical side, because
Mm-hmm.
there's that like wow factor to be able to do
Totally.
so physically well. But at the same time, it's like there, if that's like your main objective, sometimes it's hard to like throw in like your own personal like feeling into it
Yeah.
and take the time to understand like what does this actually mean, like for me, like
Mm-hmm.
what am I saying through these 32 fouettes.
Right. Yeah.
So
Well,
I think like
and
yeah.
that's I mean, I'm thinking of that in terms of uh, when that also becomes uh, a big part of your identity and maybe even job work.
Yeah.
Uh, that's even like that happens to a lot of us in our jobs, right? Where it's like, no, like forget how you like however you feel doesn't matter. This just this project just needs to get done, or like
Mhm.
we just need to do this. We need to meet this deadline. We got to create this thing. I like I have plenty of days that like I'm not feeling like I'm super excited to even meet with clients, and then most of the time I feel really lucky in that I love what I do, and most of the time in meeting with the clients I'm like really excited by that. But
Mhm.
there's parts of any of our jobs that have things that like we don't like doing or don't want to do, and that's a really complex sort
Mhm.
of motivational space of like
Because
I
there's
think
always
it's sometimes easier to just shut off those feeling parts of ourselves and just
just try to.
plow through. Yeah,
Mhm.
but I appreciate. I mean, I think we all. That's sort of the cost of being more rooted or connected with our own
Yeah.
selves,
Um,
and that.
yeah. I think so I guess like growing up as a dancer, I was under the impression that if you wanted to make a career out of dance, you had to get hired into a dance company by the time
Right.
you turned 18. You had like your prime years, like early to mid 20s, and then retired by like 30 years old.
Yeah.
Because apparently, as a dancer, that's like the end of your end of
Yeah.
your career
Right. I
life.
mean, it's like being other forms of profession. I mean, as a dancer, you are an athlete and a creative at the same time, right? But
Yeah.
it's like other forms of professional athletes where it's like, yep, you go straight out of high school, maybe
Mhm.
college, and then you have
And then it's a
10
shorter,
years and then you're
yeah, just because like your physical body, or I guess
yeah.
um, I guess I've been challenged with this because um, you grow up with this idea, or like someone telling you like you have to be doing this while you're young and
Yep.
you can't do this while you're older,
Right.
which I guess like I accepted that as a fact growing up,
Yeah.
but I mean I just turned 29, which I feel like I can do like anything in the
Yeah,
world.
still right,
So
sure.
like, this
Yeah.
isn't all. This shouldn't.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's really not. uh yeah.
But
And yeah, there's something in there about um like I don't know, strange things about our culture's fear of getting old and fear of dying and like need to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and all kinds of things around our own shame around our own bodies and stuff that is all feels tangled up in that.
Yeah. It's like, I think, I mean, for most dancers, um, you know, that whole like Misty Copeland where she like gets into a company at 13 and was was already dancing professionally in New York by like
Yeah.
15 years old. Like that doesn't happen to most of us. Like,
Right.
but you know, we kind of still grow up with this whole like
Right. These are
very
the narratives that we're
Mhm.
told and sold.
Yeah. It's like that dance career like at in your teen years doesn't happen to, you know,
Right.
most of us. Um, but I think what some people right away realize that they need to still make a living in
Yeah.
another career that they have either like little interest in, or if they do end up like getting a somewhat of a low paying dance job, they still have to work like 5 other jobs just to
Yeah,
make.
sure. Right. And that feels like increasingly plenty of us are doing that
Yes.
sort of thing, which is like, uh, I guess there's more of that out there, but
Hmm.
it's also really hard to have your heart and your mind and your time so divided between all those things. That's a
Yeah.
cost in and of itself.
Yeah. I was like, how can people still kind of do what they're passionate about while making a living?
Yeah.
It's like where is it that that's, I guess, like feeling for being connected for with your body or being connected as a creative or an artist
Yeah.
fit into like living and working an actual like sustainable career that you
Yeah, totally.
live off
I,
of.
I am obsessed with that question. And hopefully not surprisingly, it's not an easy answer of like, well, it's just these, you know, all
Yeah.
you got to do, you know, buy my 3-step program and I'll give you all the keys to.
Yeah.
Um, but there, yeah, there's that sense of, in a sense, how do I, as an artist or creative, like, I think we find so much life in doing those sort of things, and it's this sense of like, uh do I sell out? Do I, like, even if I'm doing, even if I am a dancer and I'm working for a company, like,
Mhm.
sometimes it feels like, no, I still am just like having to do other people's visions, or I, you know, I want to do art, and so like I figure I can integrate that with being maybe a graphic designer or something like that, but then I'm still executing other people's things. It's not about the sort
Yeah.
of pureness of creativity that
Yeah.
sometimes gives a lot of us life. And so there's that question of, um, especially in a culture that really values certain kinds of careers.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, growing
Like
disproportional wealth gaps and expectations around productivity equaling value, time equals money.
yeah.
Um, and so that has even bigger questions, I think, for people who are like performers, when it's like you do the thing and there's not a tangible concrete thing at the end to show for it. I mean, maybe
Mm.
it gets recorded or passed on, but that, you know, is different. And
Yeah.
but that question of, yeah, how do I stay connected to my soul,
Yeah.
to my spirit, and what gives me life and energy and my own sense of integrity,
Yeah.
and participate in a capitalist consumer culture that like says to be happy you need this sort of things.
Mhm.
And I think some part of that is actually taking a critical look at both of those,
Mhm.
of being able to say, okay, um, what is it about, dancing or painting or making music or whatever that sort of creative pursuit may be that like gives me life and like and like holding on to that and saying, okay, what what are the goals of me stepping into another career? Is it just to make enough money to be able to do this? Is it that there are other things that I also like to do, and like maybe that can also be incorporated into it? And if parts of this are also parts of the job itself, like how much of it, and how do I protect sort of the soul of my creative work while also doing something quasi-creative for someone else? I think that's a constant struggle with artists and creatives that I'm talking with. And there's like, I think things that are important in that are just really core and regular check-ins with ourselves and with other people, and understanding like our own constructs. And so when I say constructs, what I mean is like we have, as we're thinking about our identity, we create sort of labels for ourselves, and those can be anything from like gender constructs to dancer, non-dancer, or creative, non-creative, like those things. And the reality is and we have lots of them, hopefully, but like there's a psychologist that I really like named Brian Little, who's a sort of personality psychologist, and he talks about the more constructs that we actually have and are operating in, the more degrees of freedom that we actually have. And so when I'm not just dancer or non-dancer, that helps a little bit to be able to say, okay, what are some of these other things that I also can be doing? But like that doesn't happen on our own. We're not the individual like separate units that I think a lot of especially white American culture, white Western culture wants to make us. And
there's also always like kind of like, what stereotype am I in?
Yes, totally, right. What roles am I playing? What aspects of cultural assumptions? And like, and that's so complex, right? Because we also need others' feedback to know, like, we may think we're the best dancer in the world, but if like no one wants to watch us and we're just flailing around on or whatever, that happens across the board. And it's so complex.
It's like we don't want to. I think that's interesting that you said that about Brian Little, like that the more constructs that you have, or like the more freedom that you have. I think the freedom would have to come with accepting like all of those, and like knowing that you're a combination of them, rather than like saying like, oh, I'm a dancer, and then that switches on, and then you turn it off, and then like you switch lights to becoming a graphic designer, or like whatever else like that field is.
Right, totally. And that switching off, like it, especially if there's just a few of them and that gets switched off, that's so much harder. But even if you have a lot of them and you're letting go of a couple as being more core or primary identifiers, there's a lot of grief there, and that like needs to get grieved and like engaged and dealt with. And I think that we also like really underscore and undersell grief in that, and I think there's something about, in particular, performative creative things, whether that's music or dance or other things like that, that help hold and give a lot more space for grief than, as a general rule, our cultures. I mean, again, I'm speaking from my own like white American culture. Like we kind of don't want to even deal with grief, and that ties into some of the things around aging and stuff that you also talked about. But music and performing stuff holds space for that way better than other parts do.
If anything, because like I feel like those activities or those things that we do to fully express ourselves are what we feel like so connected to in terms of like who we are and like our identity, and we find like that attachment to ourselves and being able to fully express ourselves when we do those things. So like if you tell a dancer that, you know, they can no longer dance anymore, then there's this whole like, you know, just like one internal battle that like, but I am a dancer, like, or it's like, am I still a dancer, but I do this? Like, do I still like hold on to like this part of me as a person, but I'm just doing that other thing?
Right. Well, and we really want to make, I think that's also an aspect of, we really want to make our jobs our primary identity a lot of times. You know, it's like a really common question when you meet somebody that like one of the first things you ask is, what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, you know, I sleep for 7 to 10 hours a night. Like, you know, I do a lot of things, but what we're really asking about is career, because that's a primary identifier and a primary construct. So then we can sort of map them into what we know. And what you're talking about is that sense that there's often a binary about that like, if I switch to another thing being what I'm doing for job, then does the other thing go away? And that's very much about how you hold on to it internally. Because I mean, the reality is, at least most of us, even if we aren't dancing professionally, there's still opportunities for us to dance. But when my construct of what it means to be a dancer has a lot more to it than it to shift what it means to still be a dancer if I'm not doing all these other things requires me to do a lot of work to be really intentional about finding spaces where I can still dance and can still express myself. And the reality is, when you take on some other job, it probably won't have as many spaces for creative expression. And so like that still needs to go somewhere. Like, I think there's something about being really intentional about honoring that in yourself. But unfortunately, like it's when you are a creative or an artist as primary profession, and that's most of your time, then those are almost sort of pre-packaged ways of like having all of that and being able to do it on a regular basis. And when you lose that, I think it's important to say, one, that is actually a loss, and being able to feel that and grieve that. And like, that's some of the transition process of like the letting go, the being in the unknown in between. William Bridges is written a book about transitions, and he calls that the neutral zone, of the sense of like, it's disorientation and reorientation and like connecting to this and letting go of that. And and I think
you're not like fully one side or
and there's, I think, probably some interesting like dance metaphors that would hold well for in that, as you are sort of, I mean, dance is in the sense you're always transitioning from one
Mm-hmm.
shape,
One,
form, pose to another.
yep.
And so I think there's something that we can probably learn from dancers about what it means to not be so locked into this or this, but like finding beauty in the transitions themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
As far as
but
like the dance perspective, like
yeah,
they always say that the difference between an amateur and a professional um, is being able to blend everything, all these in between steps, or like
yeah,
the movement in between the big movements,
yeah,
and being able to like seamlessly like go from like one to the other, as opposed to like pose, step,
right.
step, step, pose.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
it's like
Right.
just
And I think that's great in the sense that like that's how you know like a master performer when you see one, is that sense of that. And I think we expect to and that mastery comes with doing it a ton, right? But I think in terms of our own personal lives, we expect to just be able to do that.
yeah,
But like that's also a skill that like we have to grow and learn and cultivate. We don't inherently know how to do. We do need, like you were talking about, we do need role models, and we do need feedback that it's okay to like pay attention to the in between places rather than um, being overly attached to end results or like where we came from. And
yeah,
so we also need like extra support a lot of times in those transition spaces, and whether that's working with someone like you to be able to just think about physically what it means to embody in that time and perform, and like, yeah, if I'm going from where I was working as a dancer and working 10 hours a day dancing and doing stuff to it, to all of a sudden I'm working a desk job, then like I really need to care for and paying attention to my body in
yeah.
that time, and both in terms of physical health and emotional, all the stuff that's going to come out and be held in my body.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the same thing uh, if like, you know, there's also people like me that are helping, you know, think about those transitions, or talking with a therapist about all the stuff that's coming up in that. Like, I think we also need to value uh, the supports that are there to help us in those transitional spaces. And that's what I
Definitely.
love about both my work and the sort of things that it sounds like you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I always wonder like, so and people like grow up with like this identity of like their creative side, and then they are wanting up to realize that they can't make a living out of doing that. What are ways that you think they can discover new passions, or
Yeah,
new new like a new purpose for their following like career
totally. I
that would
think,
actually pay the bills?
what'd you say?
Uh, in a career that would
And
actually
pay the
pay
bills.
the
Yeah,
bills.
yeah, 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 yeah. Right. I think it's actually helpful to be aware that those can be separate categories first and foremost. That like my job, what pays the bills,
Hmm.
passion and calling uh, don't have to always be the same thing. I think um, one thing in creatives, and plenty of others as well, right,
Yeah.
is that um, we we sort of expect a lot of us are idealists, and we sort of expect that like we'll have the perfect combination, that we'll just figure it out, like we'll know it, you should know it.
Yeah.
And
I think you'll just be like so easy. Like the answer will just be
yeah,
right
yeah.
on the
And
table.
that's not actually that's not often the case. I mean, there are a few people, and we love those stories, and they're great stories to tell, but like the reality is almost anyone, no matter what you uh, what sort of you end up doing, we all need, or 90% of us need help in sort of putting those things together and understanding those facets of ourselves. You know, the stereotype of the whether that's the school counselor, or career coach or counselor,
Mm-hmm.
like having the person come in and being like, well, what do you want to do with your life? And this sense of like, if I knew, I wouldn't be talking to you. Like, that's,
That's
and most of us don't know. And like, there's tools, there's process, there's whole industries out there,
mm-hmm.
some of which are predatory and some of which are really helpful.
Yeah.
But like that takes work. Like, it is work in and of itself. And like, I think the more clear that we can be around what our own values and motivations are,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that what are the specific, even breaking it down into specific tasks, what are the tasks that we like doing?
Mm-hmm.
What things do we tend to have skill in, and what do we gravitate towards?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a book that I really like, or a series of books called Designing Your Life or Designing Your Work Life, by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And they sort of play with this a little bit of approaching it from a design thinking perspective, that rather than assuming there is this perfect prepackaged thing out there, that oftentimes it has to be designed, it has to be created. And that means try, iterate, see what doesn't work. What doesn't work is often just as helpful data as what does work. And that it's this like constant process, but that's a set of skills and tools that most of us don't necessarily even think should be the case.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't equipped with. But like, I think just as a very simple thing, paying attention to a lot of times with clients, I'll have them keep track of over the course of a week, what is giving them energy and what is draining energy to them. And just thinking of yourself as a, your job, your first job really is learning yourself. And sometimes that's a side job because you already have another job, but you're in this like space of like, later on down the road, what am I doing? But yeah, pay attention to what's giving you energy, what's draining energy. Pay attention to what do you find yourself most engaged with? Where is it that you lean in? And a lot of times, if we're someone like a dancer who's been doing this for a long time, it's really easy to say, yes, well, dance. Like, I know that's the thing. And that encompasses a whole wide realm of things, right? And so sometimes it's helpful to get even more sort of nuanced and lean in and be like, okay,
Really
what parts of this like are better or worse for you? Like, is it really about the physical, like doing something physical and in movement, and like that's a good cue? Is it about actually working together with other people? Like, that's a really helpful aspect. Is it
is it having a schedule of like going to
right, totally,
rehearsal every day? Like,
find those parts that are like, this part, I mean, because any of us, right, have that with our jobs, that there's parts that we like and there's parts that we don't, there's parts that are harder. And so being able to kind of deconstruct it and take it apart into these little bits, each of those bits that are like, well, this is better and this is better, like we can start putting those together in different ways. And those help give us
like what brings you energy rather than like what drains you, like constantly, like over and over.
Totally. And what do you find yourself interested in? Like, what's what's making you pay attention? What are you doing when you're not dancing that's like intriguing to you? Like those are, you know, what links are you clicking on your phone? Like
Yeah.
all of that is good data for understanding those aspects, and those same helping make it more complex, those constructs like dancer or like artist, and
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, there's parts of this that are here. And the more that we can say, can break it down into those constructs, even if I do have to take some of them and I'm doing some other job, that still lets me say, these things are really important for me. And so I have to work really hard. And that sometimes sucks. Like, and being able to be honest and acknowledge that is really hard, but work really hard to have those things in other times. And maybe that means, you know, all my Saturdays are dedicated to doing dance, even though my actual job is doing this, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm leading a class somewhere, or I'm taking a class somewhere, or I'm participating in this particular group, or
Yeah. Just
um,
fitting in like those times where like you do things that like really like you love and that like give you energy while you have your other like job to where you know that satisfies like your financial needs and
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and hopefully more than just financial needs too, right? Like, um, and sort of disillusioning ourselves of the false illusion that like that's going to be that our job is going to be the thing that gives us full satisfaction and makes our life complete, and
mm-hmm.
that it's even if that's part of our calling is to do these particular things, individual jobs are just part of, I mean, are just part of that. And so I see even like my work with my company is very tied to my calling, and like that could go away and I could do 10 other things that also are towards what I see as my calling in the world. But that's also come with years of work around understanding and clarifying what that is. And again, like the reminder that that takes work to get there.
Yeah.
And like, I think there's something about, you know, if it is in particular dance, that's the thing that you are so passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
then like find ways to incorporate that, and like pay attention to the particular parts of it that are exciting to you. See what parts of it and other parts of your life you can bring together into a job. Don't do it alone. Bring that to other people as part of a, you know, process. Find other people that are doing sorts of things that you like, and in particular, if we're talking about the aging thing, who are people who are older than you and more experienced, they're doing things connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think it's, I mean, this kind of just goes to like how we grow up as humans. Like, I feel like in the education system, like, they don't teach us those specific skills that say, like, oh, you should like work on yourself and like see what it is that you want to do. Like, they kind of just like throw that question out you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right, totally,
Well,
totally.
what is the
And that you
connection
should
to
know that.
it? Like, why is it like so assumed that like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Right. And most of the time we don't like we don't actually know until we do actually do something.
Yeah.
And sometimes do something a moderate bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of research that suggests um, like doing something to the point that we like get kind of good at it, and
Mm-hmm.
that we get a lot of satisfaction from being good at certain things. But
Yeah.
like that doesn't happen until we actually try them out and do them for a period of time. And so um, it may very well be that what you want to do is something that you haven't, like, you don't know that you want to do it because you haven't even done it yet. And so that's also like, I wish there were a lot more opportunities for um,
Like, kind of just like trying out
yeah,
like for your
yeah,
careers, or like, you know, just getting like more of a hands-on experience.
yeah, yeah. Whether, I mean, even if that starts with what I'd call informational interviews, or like
Hmm.
ask people out to coffee,
Yeah.
conversations around it, and like things like job shadows and
Mhm.
that, but also just like, we live in a world of YouTube videos, and like there's lots of stuff out there, like check stuff out, and like your first job, again, like you were saying, because we aren't taught that, like really is exploring. And that's like a
Yeah.
big part of our adolescence and even our 20s, is like doing that exploration work. And if you're in your 40, if you're in your late 40s and like that's still a question that you're just now starting to ask, like that's okay too. We all need to learn that, and it doesn't happen until we actually go through the process.
Yeah.
And we're such a, we want to be, we have these assumptions that like, yeah, you should know what it is, and we're a quick fix, fast food culture that like just wants to have the end results now, but like
Yeah.
it only happens through doing it. And in some ways, like the more complex of a person you are, um, the more complex that work is going to be. And sometimes that's really hard versus like the person who, like there's also those people who are like, they know from,
Like they just know, like that's
yeah,
their
yeah.
calling.
And a little bit of like, sometimes what I'm hearing in you is that like that could very well be like, yeah, from age 5 I'm like, dancer, that's what I'm going to do. And then I get to 30 and I'm like, that can't be my
That's not like
career
my calling.
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that then means, um, again, that there's, you need to have space for that loss and grieving that can't be the case,
Mhm.
and go through the process of starting to learn and explore in different ways, and still hold on to dance as something that is important and valuable to you, and like, and remind yourself that not having that as like the top thing on your resume or CV doesn't make you not a dancer.
Yeah.
Um, like dancing makes you a dancer, and so like find places to dance, or
Mhm.
but like also, this is a chance for you to bring that to other people.
Yeah.
Um,
To kind of like share like what my experience was, and like sharing like my own like knowledge, and
yeah,
helping people
right,
like through that.
totally.
I think I like the idea that you bring up, that we should have more, I guess, like open conversation, or more accessibility to know more about different types of careers, and to experience
Yeah,
different fields, because well, in dance, like you could grow up as a dancer and like actually get into a company, but because you've never fully like been in that, it could
yeah,
be something completely different, like the just like a bunch of like other struggles and like challenges, um, and it's not like all that you
right. It's
that it will turn out
hard
to be.
work, right? Yeah, I think uh, there's something about, we um, we find these like particular activities that we like to do,
Hmm.
and we want to make that what we do all the time, understandably, because we like doing them.
Hmm.
But like the actual profession of doing that thing all the time
Hmm.
asks something
It's
really different. Like the amount of just hard work and what that asks of you, and does to your body to be a professional dancer
hmm
doing that, is not just like, dancing and having fun dancing at a club or like in your living room. And like you can love to dance, but that's a very big difference from like what that asks of you on a day in, day out basis.
yeah.
And the same thing, uh, that with other jobs, and that can be a mercy too, though, is the sense of like, yeah, uh, sometimes it's really actually nice to have oh, I see a little floofer behind you.
Yeah. He was napping here the whole time.
Oh, so cute. This is one of my favorite parts of having more Zoom meetings with people lately is I've gotten to meet so many people's pets.
He's so
But that sense of being able to have boundaries around your work and being able to be like, yep, and like my work is done for the day and I get to go home and experience other parts of myself and my life
mhm.
that like bring me
Fulfillment and like joy.
fulfillment. Yeah, yeah,
That I feel like that keeps you sane. I think it's super important, especially like in this time, to know how to organize that
yeah,
within our daily lives,
yeah,
and making
yeah,
sure that you have like all of those like aspects within that, um, to just like keep yourself like fulfilled like as a person.
yeah.
I
Right. And
think
that again, that doesn't like we don't just know that by default also either. Or like
yeah.
you're saying, like we have to learn that. We have to explore that. We have to like uh and we have to get rid of that sense of perfectionism that says we have to like have it perfect because we can't explore, we can't play, we can't create
Yeah.
um, until we can allow for the maybes and the transitions and the imperfect.
Mm-hmm. I think it's it's definitely been a struggle, like having to stay at home, and like you have to kind of like figure out your day and like your work schedule, and like everything's like all blended in together right now.
Yeah,
People are just like
yeah,
at home, and like they have the kids, and then like they still have to work, and like
yeah,
they got to take care of like the house, and everything is just like really like mushed together. It's like what are the boundaries, and like, or how can I create those like
yeah,
boundaries
yeah,
of like work, play, you know self-care, like taking care of kids, or like
yeah.
down your
And like uh and you're totally right that like we have to create them and sometimes that feels like totally artificial.
yeah.
Right. And like
Where's the
yep,
boundaries
the
here?
minute I close this I mean like this is my office, this is also the guest bedroom in our apartment.
Hmm.
And like and I use this desk to do other things. I paint here and um I do I do both like work and fun stuff, and it's like also a weird guest room in our apartment. And so like but I have to like make these boundaries when I am starting of like, okay, I'm closing the door. Like
Uh-huh.
it helps to have little tiny rituals, whether that's lighting a candle or saying something as you close the door, even if it's just a momentary thing that like help create that. And
Hmm.
I think you nailed something too when talking about like kids and some of the other stuff that like we have to make these boundaries and do our best to keep them, but also like not hold them so tightly that we collapse if
If they're
the
not like,
kid comes running in the room while we're
it's like you messed up my zen place right there.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you know.
kids are great at doing that.
Oh yeah.
Or pets, I mean it's lovely to have them, and all of a sudden like the cat walks onto my laptop and
Oh.
like the cat's butt's in front of the camera or something, and you're just like,
Yep. That's so funny. But that's really just like real life right now, and
yeah, yeah.
that is what it is.
And I loved that you said like uh, I love that you talked about how hard it is though too, because I think that goes back to I think a theme that we've said in some of this is that we expect that it should just be this way
Mm.
rather than like having to do the work to make it work for us.
Uh-huh.
And like part of that is acknowledging how actually hard it is,
Yeah.
that it doesn't just like we're in a cultural transition neutral zone of like not knowing what's going to be and letting go of some things, and
Hmm.
um and some of that like in order to do anything productive, there's some bit of we can't dwell on it the entirety of the time, but acknowledging how hard it actually is, like accepting what is real and what is in front of us and
Yeah.
what we're working with and in.
Absolutely. It's like the I'm glad that we like were able to kind of just like to talk about this and just like get this discussion going, because like there are a lot of things that people are having to deal with, like with this whole like transition, not just like um, not just like throughout, you know, the life of an artist in that transition, but also in particular like now, like everyone's in that transition mode.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to do our best, like balancing all the different hats that we have to wear,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like trying to figure out like where what time is dedicated to what, or like how much energy is dedicated to like this particular task. So I think
Mhm.
it's a very important conversation to just be having at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we wrap up here, I would love if you can tell our listeners what if you have like any upcoming events or upcoming programs that you're working on.
Sure. Um, one last thing, while I was thinking of it, like I didn't spend a lot of time researching, but I did find there is an organization which is called Career Transitions for Dancers,
Mm-hmm.
that is part of the Artist Guild, that offers support sort of particularly in this area, and
Oh, awesome.
um, encouraging people to talk to other people, whether that's professionals that are helping in these sort of spaces, or
Mm-hmm.
um, other people that are doing something that seems to be working.
Yeah.
Uh, like we all need each other more in this time than ever before.
Yeah. I
Um,
think that's really funny that you bring that up, because I think was it what was it called?
Career Transitions for Dancers.
Uh, I have to say, I think I've seen the ad for that organization when I was like 7 years old.
Wow. Okay, so they've been around.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think it's kind of fascinating that they're the only ones that I guess I've personally heard of. I don't think there's really a whole lot of
Yeah.
programs that's really offered specifically for artists transitioning into other careers. Is that I think I've briefly like looked over like their program before, and you know, they help you with going back to college and like finding a new like career path in that way.
Yeah.
So they'll work with company dancers uh,
Right.
and like help them go back to go to go get a
School or
degree like
training
while
or
they're
something like that.
dancing
Yeah.
professionally. So I feel like there is definitely a need for more of those types of programs and more support that helps with that transition. Not even like in addition to the career supports, but you know, the physical and emotional, like
Yeah. Right. 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 It's so integrated,
yeah,
and the response has to be inclusive of all of that. And it may be that like no one person or group is able to.
to do that one like
Yeah. Yeah.
all of that at once. So
Totally.
it's really being able to know where to find that support, and obviously like they can definitely go to you for that type of guidance with that the life transition and being able to find out where to find meaning in their lives and like in the activities that they do. As well as for me, like that was one of my focuses
Yeah.
that I want to touch on, because there is like that disconnect with like not just like your almost like a loss of like identity and
Totally.
grieving
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
part of you, but I feel like we always have to kind of still find ways to connect to our bodies on a physical sense, to one,
It's
not just for
so important
health,
in that area.
but for, you know, your emotional like well-being, and finding importance through the with the things um, that give us energy and
Yeah.
uh, give us life and give us purpose.
Yeah. It feels extra important in
Yeah.
those spaces because we can, like, particularly if there's spaces of feeling disconnected from other things,
Mm-hmm.
then like it's easy sometimes for us to disconnect from other things, and our bodies are so, they're still holding all of that stuff, and if we don't engage with them, that's just going to sit there and build up, and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be cared for and worked with and expressed and engaged. And most
Absolutely.
of us, I think, don't necessarily know how to do that all that well, especially in those hard areas. So
Mm-hmm.
that feels important.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Phil, for chatting with me and just like how like discussing this, because it really is just such an important to talk about today, and I appreciate your time. And for those of you who are listening via Facebook or even the pre-recording, I appreciate your time listening to this. I also I would love to give you guys information on how to reach out to Phil and as well as me. So I will put some description or I'll put some links and information um, on more of that
Yeah,
with
thank you.
the links below.
Great.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
for doing this.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Phil. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank
You
you,
too.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.